It was a cold Monday. The November morning greeted the industrial area of the city with a dank fog and a light rain. An old man collecting scrap metal among the rusting remains of former industrial Granger first mistook the body for an abandoned mannequin, but when he came closer and saw the dark stain around the head, he recoiled, and with shaky hands dialed 911. Detective Victor Morgan turned his tattered sedan onto the broken driveway leading to the abandoned shop. The flashing lights of police cars cut through the gray gloom, reflecting in puddles of muddy brown water. Pulling on gloves, he stepped out of the car, shivering in the piercing wind. 42 years on. The force had taught him a lot, but the sight of a murdered young girl never made it any easier. "What have we got? O'Brien," he asked, approaching the young patrolman standing by the yellow tape. "White female, about 18 to 20 years old," he reported. "Gunshot wound to the head. Looks like a point-blank shot. No ID on her, but forensics is working on it." Morgan nodded and ducked under the tape, walking toward the crime scene. The girl lay on the concrete floor, covered in dust and long, dried oil stains. Her blonde hair spread around her head, partially clumped together from the blood. Her face was almost intact. The gunshot had hit the back of her head, the exit wound distorting her forehead. She was wearing jeans, sneakers, and a light jacket. "Too light for this weather. Time of death?" Morgan asked the medical examiner, leaning over the body tentatively. "Between 22 and 2 o'clock in the morning," he answered without lifting his head. "I'll be more specific after the autopsy." Morgan walked slowly around the body, scrutinizing the surroundings. The shop was long abandoned, with trash scrapboards and empty bottles lying around, a typical shelter for the homeless or teenagers seeking solitude. But something wasn't adding up. The place was too inaccessible to wander in here by accident. "Did anyone hear a gunshot?" he asked the operative, making notes in his notebook. "No, sir. The nearest working businesses are 300 meters away, and no one heard anything suspicious on the night shift. The acoustics here are lousy, and the machines hum all the time." Morgan looked around as he left the shop. The industrial zone was a maze of dilapidated buildings, rusting structures, and the occasional operating plant. His gaze locked on a relatively new building with a metal gate, one of the few inhabited structures nearby. "What's that building?" He pointed in the direction of the garage. "A private machine shop and garage owned by one Daniel Foster." One of the policemen answered, "We've already interviewed his employee, and he says the owner doesn't come here regularly, only when he's working on personal projects." Morgan walked slowly toward the garage. It was a typical industrial zone building, but clearly well-maintained, fresh paint on the gate, a repaired roof, security cameras. The service door was unlocked. It was clean inside, smelling of engine oil and cleaning products, too clean for a working garage. "How long had this place been cleaned?" Morgan asked the young mechanic who was fiddling with tools. "The owner came in last night and worked late." He shrugged. "When I came in today, everything had been scrubbed to a high shine. He's not usually this clean." The detective walked slowly around the room. Something was wrong. The concrete floor looked freshly mopped, and there was still a faint odor of bleach in the air. When he came to the desk, he noticed a calendar with dates marked on it, and a phone book on the last page was scrolled "an 8 p.m. garage. Who's in?" Morgan asked, showing the tape to the mechanic. "I have no idea," he said, genuinely surprised. "Mr. Foster doesn't let me in on his business." Taking the shop's business card, Morgan walked back out into the drizzling rain. His intuition told him there was a connection between the garage and the murder. Although there was no proof yet, 2 hours later, forensics found a receipt from a coffee shop dated yesterday afternoon in the pocket of the victim's jeans. The name on the charge card identified her as Natalie Gray, 18 years old, a first-year student at a local college. The address of registration matched the address of the garage owner, Daniel Foster. "Let's go," Morgan said to his partner as he headed for the car. "We need to notify the family." The Foster's house was in a quiet suburb. A two-story house with a well-tended garden and a white picket fence. Typical American prosperity. As Morgan and his partner drove up, a tall man in an expensive coat came out of the house. Mr. Foster. Morgan called out to him, showing his badge. Detective Victor Morgan, homicide. The man froze, his hand trembling for a moment, but his face remained unruffled. What can I do for you, detective? I need to talk to you and your wife. It's about Natalie. Gray. Foster's face twitched. Did something happen to Natalie? She didn't come home last night. My wife and I thought she was at a friend's. Let's go inside, Mr. Foster. Morgan said softly but insistently. An elegant woman in her 40s met them in the living room, blonde hair in a neat bun, stylish blouse, attentive eyes. Carol, this is the police? Daniel introduced them dryly. It's about Natalie. What's wrong with her? Anxiety contorted the woman's beautiful face. Where is she? Morgan took a deep breath. This part of the job never got easier. I'm so sorry. Mrs. Foster, your niece's body was discovered this morning. She's dead. Carol Foster didn't scream. She didn't faint. She just froze, as if she had become a statue. Her fingers clenched convulsively on the armrests of the chair. It's impossible, she whispered. We were just yesterday. I saw her at breakfast. Daniel stepped toward his wife and put his hand on her shoulder, but she shivered. How did it happen? Foster's voice was steady, but Morgan could see the white knuckles of his clenched fists. Gunshot wound body was found in an abandoned shop near your garage. Mr. Foster, my garage. Daniel sounded genuinely surprised, but what was she doing in an industrial zone? I was. Hoping you could explain that to me, Morgan said, watching the couple carefully. When was the last time you were in your garage? Mr. Foster? He hesitated. About 5 days ago. I think I haven't had time to work on the car. That's odd. Your mechanic claims he saw you there last night. Foster scratched himself as if he had a toothache. Oh, yeah, I forgot. I stopped by to see how things were going, but I was only there for about 15 minutes. Could you tell me about Natalie? Morgan looked at Carol. When did she move in? 2 months ago, the woman answered quietly. My sister lives in a small town with no good college. Natalie got a scholarship and we offered her a place to live with us. She was so bright, smart, sometimes stubborn. Did she have any enemies? Trouble? Maybe she'd been afraid of something lately? Carol shook her head but suddenly froze. She wanted to talk to me, the woman whispered. Yesterday morning she said she had something important to tell me, but I was in a hurry to get to a lecture postponed the conversation. Tears streamed down her face. Daniel tried to hug his wife again, but she shied away from his touch. Did you, Mr. Foster, notice anything unusual about Natalie's behavior? Morgan asked. No. Nothing, he answered too quickly. Just a normal teenage girl. Studied, went out with friends. She had a boyfriend. I think ex-boyfriend. Carol clarified. They broke up a week ago. He threatened her. Morgan became wary. Threatened her. How I heard them arguing on the phone, Carol continued. He yelled that if she thought she could walk away from him that easily, she was wrong, that she'd regret it. This guy's name, Trevor Walsh. I think he works at an auto body shop or something. Morgan wrote the name down in his notebook. Typical scenario, jealous ex. But my gut told me it wasn't that simple. Mr. Foster, I need you to come with me to the morgue for a formal identification, the detective said. And if you don't mind, I'd like to take a look around Natalie's room while Daniel nervously gathered himself. Morgan went up to the second floor, accompanied by Carol. Natalie's room looked typical of a student's posters on the walls, stacks of textbooks, makeup on the dressing table, nothing suspicious at first glance. She's changed a lot lately, Carol said quietly, standing in the doorway. She's become secretive, often going off without saying where she was going. I thought it was the breakup with Trevor, but now I'm not so sure. Morgan looked around the desk, flipping through textbooks and notebooks. Nothing of note. There was a picture on the bedside table. Natalie, between Daniel and Carol, all three of them smiling. She was a beautiful girl, the detective remarked, looking at the photo. Yeah, Carol's voice sounded genuinely pained. She looked a lot like my sister when she was young. Suddenly there was a noise downstairs. The front door slamming. Loud voices. Morgan came down quickly and saw a tall young man arguing furiously with Daniel. "Where is she?" "I know she's here," shouted the stranger. "Trevor, get out of my house." Right now, Foster's face contorted with rage. "Not before I see Natalie! What have you done to her?" Morgan stepped forward, showing his badge. "Police, are you, Trevor Walsh?" The young man froze, shifting his gaze from the detective to the Fosters. "Yeah, why we need to talk about Natalie Gray," Morgan said, gesturing him into the living room. "When was the last time you saw her?" Trevor frowned. "The day before yesterday we met at the cafe, and I wanted to make up, but she told me to go to hell." He gave Daniel an angry look, said she was seeing someone else, someone grown up and established. "And how did you react, like a normal person?" "I got angry. We dated for 6 months, and she dumps me for some old guy with money." "Did you threaten her?" Morgan's voice got rougher. "Come on, everyone says stupid things in the heat of the moment," Trevor said. "I would never wait." "What's wrong? Why are you all looking at me like that?" Morgan sighed. "Natalie Gray was murdered last night." Trevor Walsh's interrogation lasted 2 hours. The young man, initially aggressive and nervous, had gradually subsided into genuine despair. According to him, on the night of the murder, he was on the night shift at an auto repair shop across town, which was soon confirmed by 3 witnesses and surveillance footage. The alibi was airtight, and yet you threatened her. Morgan watched the suspect's reaction carefully. "Yes, I said a lot of stupid things, but they were just words." Trevor ran his palm over his face. "I loved her, detective. God, I can't believe it. Who could have done this?" Something about the sincerity of his grief convinced Morgan letting the boy go. He returned to the main crime scene. The industrial area looked even more bleak in the daytime. Gray buildings, cracked, asphalt sparse, workers scurrying about. The detective parked in front of Foster's garage, and for a while just sat there watching the building. Something was stubbornly bugging him. This time, there were forensic technicians working in the garage, methodically examining every inch of the room. One of the techs called Morgan over. "Look what we found." She pointed to the barely visible marks on the concrete floor. "They're traces of blood. Someone scrubbed them very carefully, but our reagents still show a reaction." "The direction of the marks?" Morgan asked. "Squatting down, looks like the body was dragged from the desk to the back door." The technician pointed to a faint trail, and from there it was easy to get to the abandoned shop where the body had been found. Morgan nodded. The picture was becoming clearer. The murder had probably taken place here in the garage, and then the body had been dragged into the abandoned building to draw suspicion away from this place. "What else did you find?" "Nothing concrete yet. Traces of various people, but a lot of them were destroyed by the recent cleanup." The trash can contained scraps of paper and rags with traces of cleaning products. The detective headed toward a small utility room in the corner of the garage. The cramped room was filled with tools, keys hanging on the wall. An old couch stood in the corner, clearly out of place. In the workroom, had that couch been here long? Morgan asked the mechanic. "About 3 months ago." He shrugged. "The boss said he sometimes stayed late and wanted to be able to take a nap." Morgan scrutinized the couch. Plain, worn furniture. He lifted the cushions and noticed something shiny wedged between the cushion and the backrest. "A small gold earring with a turquoise stone. That's not mine," the mechanic said quickly. "I don't even come into this den, to be honest." The detective carefully packed the find in an evidence bag. He would have to show it to Natalie's relatives later to see if it belonged to the girl. As Morgan continued his examination, he noticed a small locker with a lock. There was no key in the lock, but the detective turned to the technician. "Can you open it?" A few minutes later, the locker was opened. Inside were card documents, invoices, and a leather-bound notebook. Morgan carefully pulled it out and flipped through it, though. Entries were in small, neat handwriting dates, times short notes. Many of the entries contained the initial EN and timestamps. In the last month, meetings had occurred almost every week. Looks like Mr. Foster really did spend a lot more time here than he admitted, Morgan muttered. Suddenly a photograph slipped out of the notebook. The detective picked it up and froze. Natalie was leaning against a sports car that Foster was restoring in the garage. The girl was wearing a short dress that was clearly out of season, and her posture and facial expression were blatantly seductive. The caption on the back read, "For my special man, love our secret meetings," and "Holy shit," Morgan whispered. The crime picture was beginning to take shape. The relationship between uncle and niece. The secret meetings in the garage away from his wife's eyes. A secret affair that could cost Foster everything. Reputation, family career, a strong motive for murder if the girl threatened to tell his wife everything. Taking the notebook and photograph as evidence, Morgan headed toward the other workers in the industrial zone. A guard at a nearby warehouse confirmed that he often saw Foster in the garage in the evenings, especially on Wednesdays and Saturdays. He'd also seen a young girl matching Natalie's description a few times. Pretty blonde girl. The older guard chuckled. At first I thought she was his daughter, but then one day I saw them kissing by the car. It wasn't a kinship kiss. I'll tell you that. When was this, about 3 weeks ago? Maybe I didn't think much of it. I don't know what kind of relationship anyone has, but she was a young girl, that's for sure. Back at the station, Morgan requested phone records for Natalie Gray and Daniel Foster. The results came back faster than he expected and confirmed his suspicions. 127 calls and over 1,000 text messages had taken place between them in the last 2 months. The content of the messages had yet to be officially requested, but it was already clear that they were more than just related. Most of the calls were on Wednesday and Saturday nights, which is when Foster was often in the garage. According to the guard, "Get an arrest warrant," Morgan said to his partner. "I think we have enough evidence to bring Foster in for questioning before going after the suspect." However, the detective decided to visit Natalie's college. Talking to her dorm roommate proved to be extremely helpful. She was always bragging about her grown-up boyfriend, she said nervously, tugging at the edge of her t-shirt. She said, "He was rich and powerful. We thought she was dating a professor or something. But a couple weeks ago, she blurted out that he was her uncle, and how did she explain that?" Morgan tried to speak calmly, even though his insides were seething with disgust. First, she laughed like it was cool and taboo. Then she complained that he didn't want to leave his wife. And lately she kept saying she'd have tons of money. Did she mention anything about blackmail? The neighbor girl was quiet for a moment, clearly hesitating, not directly, but she hinted that she knew how to get him to pay up. "She showed me some pictures on her phone, but she wouldn't let me see them, said it was her insurance after talking to a few other students." The picture became even clearer. Natalie did not hide her relationship with the rich adult guy in her circle of close friends, although she was careful not to reveal his identity. In recent weeks, she was especially excited. Several times came with expensive gifts, a new phone, a designer bag. She said she would soon move into her own apartment, said one of her classmates. She bragged that she wouldn't have to live with her hypocritical auntie anymore. We thought she was exaggerating, as usual. All the evidence pointed to the same motive. Natalie was blackmailing Daniel by threatening to expose their relationship, possibly demanding money or other material goods. And when the threats became real, he decided to get rid of the problem in a radical way, returning to the foster home. With a warrant, Morgan found a tense family scene there. Carol stood in the middle of the living room with the phone in her hand, her face contorted with anger and pain. Daniel sat on the couch, covering his face with his hands. "How could you?" Carol screamed. "She was a child, my niece. Her sister had entrusted her to us." It's not what it looks like, Daniel replied quietly. She manipulated me, Carol. You don't understand, Detective, Carol exclaimed as Morgan entered. I found correspondence on Natalie's cell phone. The woman couldn't finish her sentence, sobbing. We know, Mrs. Foster, Morgan said softly. We have proof of their relationship. Daniel Foster, you're under arrest on suspicion of the murder of Natalie Gray, while his partner read Foster his rights. Morgan helped Carol into a chair. When did you discover the correspondence this morning? The woman whispered. After you left. I couldn't calm down, looking for clues in her things. Her phone was locked, but I knew her password. My sister's birthday. There are dozens of messages, pictures they've been dating for almost 2 months, ever since she'd come to stay with us. Daniel, who was already being LED toward the police car, suddenly turned around. Carol, I swear I didn't kill her. Yes, we were having an affair. I was confused. She seduced me, but I didn't shoot her. You have to believe me. Shut up, Carol shouted. I'll never believe a word you say again. Back at the station, Foster held his ground. He admitted his relationship with his niece, but denied any involvement in the murder. Yes, we had an affair, he said, tapping his fingers nervously on the table. She started flirting with me herself from the first day in our house. I tried to resist, but he fell silent, realizing how pathetic his excuses sounded. What went wrong? Morgan asked, laying out the photos in front of the suspect. Did she threaten to tell your wife? Foster sighed. At first, it was just an affair. Meetings in the garage, secret phone calls like a cheap romance novel. Then she started demanding gifts. Money said she deserved compensation for our special relationship. I paid because I was afraid of a scandal. And then a week ago, she said she wanted $50,000 and her own apartment. Otherwise, she'd tell Carol everything. I didn't have that kind of money. I asked her to wait, but she just kept getting more and more insistent. So you decided to kill her. That wasn't a question. No, Foster slammed his fist on the table. I didn't kill her. Yes, I was in the garage that night. Yes, she came to see me. We fought about money again, but then she left alive. And, well, I swear to you, then explain the traces of blood in your garage and why you cleaned it so thoroughly after the conversation. Foster turned pale. She hit herself. We were arguing. She was yelling, waving her arms around, and she hit a tool rack. The iron corner split her eyebrow. There wasn't much blood, so I wiped her face, helped stop the bleeding, and I cleaned it up in the morning. I just didn't want the mechanic asking questions. And a few hours later, someone accidentally shot her in the head 100 meters from your garage. Morgan finished for him. That's a pretty good coincidence. It wasn't me, Foster sounded desperate. I don't even have a gun. That's interesting, Morgan said, opening the file, because according to the database, there's a Glock 9 gauge pistol registered in your name. That's the gun that killed Natalie Foster. Froze his face, turning dead pale. It's an old gun. I bought it for self-defense years ago. It's kept in a safe at home. I haven't even taken it out in about 5 years. When was the last time you checked the safe? Yeah, don't remember. Maybe a month ago. Foster ran his hand over his face. Look, I didn't kill Natalie. We had a complicated relationship. Yes, she was blackmailing me. Yes, but I would never have shot her in the head. Morgan gave the suspect a hard look. It was hard to tell if he was lying or truly innocent. The story sounded lame, but the fear in his eyes seemed genuine. We'll check your safe, the detective said. In the meantime, we have enough evidence to hold you after the interrogation. Morgan returned to his desk and plunged into thought. Foster's story was full of holes, but something wasn't adding up if he was planning a murder. Why leave the body so close to his own garage? Why not dispose of the body in a more secure way? Hey, Morgan, one of the officers called out to him. You got a visitor? Says it's urgent. Carol Foster met him in the waiting room. Her eyes were red from crying, but she was surprisingly focused. I have something to show you, she said, holding out an envelope. I found it in the mailbox. When I got home inside, the envelope was an unmarked flash drive. Morgan plugged it into the computer and a folder with a single video file opened on the screen. The footage showed Natalie sitting on the very same couch in the back of the garage. Her voice sounded cocky and slightly mocking. "Hi, Aunt Carol, if you're watching this video, then I've decided it's time to open your eyes. I've been sleeping with your husband for the last 2 months right here in his garage while you thought I was in class or with friends. It's funny, isn't it? He swore he loved you, but as soon as I showed a little interest, he promptly forgot his devotion. Men are so predictable." Morgan stopped the video and looked at Carol. The woman sat with her hand over her eyes. "She was different than I thought she was," Carol whispered. "I always thought she was a sweet, somewhat naive girl, but in this video, it's a completely different person. When did you get this flash drive this afternoon?" The envelope was in the mailbox. No stamp or address, just the name, Carol Maybe. Natalie mailed it shortly before she died. Morgan suggested or set it to send automatically, or someone else wants us to think that way, Carol said quietly. Morgan looked at the woman carefully. That was an interesting thought. Perhaps the killer wanted to make sure that Foster's motive would be obvious to everyone. "Do you suspect anyone in particular, Mrs. Foster?" Carol shook her head. I don't understand anything anymore. Everything I believed in has turned out to be a lie. My husband, my niece." She was suddenly silent, as if realizing something. "Detective checked the safe in our bedroom. Daniel's gun should be in there an hour later. The police searching the Foster's house reported that the safe was empty. The gun registered in Daniel's name was missing." Morgan returned to the interrogation room where the detainee was still in custody. "Your gun is missing from the safe." "Mr. Foster," he reported, "do you want to change your statement?" What the look of genuine surprise on Foster's face was convincing. "That's impossible. Only, Carol and I know the code to the safe, and Natalie Morgan suggested she could have peeked when you opened the safe." "No, she never." Foster paused as if remembering something a couple of weeks ago. "Though I caught her in our bedroom, she said she was looking for a phone charger, but she looked weird. Do you think she could have gotten a gun and shoot herself with it?" Morgan asked skeptically. "No, I don't know what happened." Foster looked completely lost. "Maybe she showed the gun to someone else. Trevor, they'd just broken up. He was furious. Trevor has an alibi," Morgan reminded me. "And you, Mr. Foster, have motive opportunity and a weapon. Not a good combination." As he left the interrogation room, Morgan strolled pensively down the hall. The story was getting more and more convoluted. If Natalie had really taken the gun from the safe, who had used it? And why had the body been left so close to the garage, as if deliberately pointing it at Foster? Morgan remembered the words of Natalie's neighbor bragging about not having to live with her hypocritical aunt anymore. Interesting choice of words. It might be worth digging deeper into the relationship between Natalie and Carol. Foster had a motive to stop the blackmailer. But what if his wife also had a motive to get rid of the girl who was destroying her family? The detective pulled out his cell phone and dialed away. "Number check Carol Foster's alibi for the night of the murder," he told his partner, "and get her phone records for the last month." Maybe our story is more complicated than it seems. Morgan was beginning to realize that everyone was hiding something. In this case, Daniel admitted to having an affair with his niece, but denied murder. Natalie manipulated and blackmailed her uncle, but was someone manipulating her herself? What if Carol knew about their relationship much earlier than she'd confessed? The detective glanced at his watch. The workday was long over, but the investigation was just picking up steam. Something told him he wouldn't get to his bed until morning. Morning found Detective Morgan in his office. He hadn't gone home after spending the night studying the case files and building a chronology of events. On the desk in front of him stood an empty coffee cup. The 4th. In the last few hours, a phone call snapped him out of his deep reverie. "Morgan?" he answered hoarsely, rubbing his reddened eyes. "Detective? It's Jackson in maintenance. We recovered the surveillance footage from the warehouse across from Foster's garage. I think you should take a look at it." 20 minutes later, Morgan was sitting in the darkened tech room, staring at the flickering computer screen. The video was grainy and fuzzy. The surveillance camera only captured a general layout of the area, but even that was better than nothing here. The technician pointed to a timestamp in the lower corner of the screen, 21 hours and 52 minutes. "Watch carefully." The recording showed a white sedan pulling up to Foster's garage. A young woman stepped out of the car. Even in the grainy footage, Natalie's blonde hair was recognizable. She quickly looked around and headed for the side door of the garage. "Was the door unlocked?" Morgan asked. "Apparently she knew the code to the lock," the technician replied. "You can see her typing something on the panel for the next 40 minutes. Nothing happened on the recording then, at 22 hours and 39 minutes. Another car pulled up to the garage, Daniel Foster's dark SUV, so Foster lied about not seeing her that night. Morgan muttered, "Wait, it gets better." The technician fast-forwarded the tape, an hour 23 hours and 44 minutes. The side door of the garage opened, and Natalie jumped out. Even the grainy footage showed that she was agitated about something moving quickly. Looking around nervously, Daniel Foster appeared behind her, holding out his hands as if trying to stop her. They talked briefly about something, and then Natalie shoved him away and headed for her car. And then the most interesting thing happened. A third figure appeared from the corner of a neighboring building. A man in dark clothes whose face could not be seen moved quickly and purposefully. When Natalie was almost to her car, the figure approached her from behind and raised his arm. The flash of the gunshot was barely visible on the grainy recording, but the aftermath left no doubt. Natalie fell to the ground and never moved again. Daniel Foster, who was still standing at the garage door, froze with shock. The shooter quickly approached him, and they had a brief conversation. Then together they approached the girl's body after a moment's confusion. The two of them dragged the body back into the garage. "Holy shit!" Morgan exhaled. They had acted together, but who's the other one? The technician shook his head. "I can't make out the face, but from the build, it's a woman short." Thin Morgan tensed, remembering his suspicions. "I'm going to need a copy of that tape. I want to know where the body went afterwards." An hour later, he got an answer to that question as well. At 2 hours and 13 minutes past 2 in the morning, the back door of the garage opened, and two figures pulled out something heavy wrapped in a tarp. They quickly crossed the vacant lot and fled into the abandoned shop, where Natalie's body was later found. After gathering all the evidence, Morgan headed toward the Foster house. Carol showed no surprise when she saw the detective on the doorstep. "Are you going to arrest me?" she asked calmly, without a trace of emotion on her face. "That depends on how honestly you answer my questions," Morgan answered, as he walked into the living room. "We found the security footage. Mrs. Foster, we know you were there the night of the murder." Carol slowly lowered herself into a chair, folding her hands in her lap. She looked both devastated and somehow strangely relieved. "I knew it would end," she said quietly. "I just didn't think it would be so soon. Tell me what happened that night." Carol took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "I've known about them for over a month now," she began. "Not of the specific details, but I sensed something was going on. Daniel had changed. He'd become distant, often late for work, making ridiculous excuses. And Natalie, she looked at me with this strange mixture of pity and superiority, like she knew something I didn't." Morgan listened silently, not interrupting at first. "I thought Daniel was having an affair with a coworker or a client, standard midlife crisis, you know. But then I started to notice the way he looked at Natalie when he thought no one was looking." Carol grinned bitterly. "I didn't want to believe it. It was too vile. I mean, she was almost a child, my sister's daughter. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things, but eventually you decided to follow up on your suspicions. Morgan said, Yeah, I started following him. I downloaded an app that tracked his location on his phone. Installed a program that recorded his messages. Most of the conversations were encrypted or deleted. But I saw some fragments, and they confirmed my worst fears. And you decided to take the gun from the safe. Carol flinched, but nodded. I didn't plan to kill anyone at first. I just wanted to scare them, make them confess. That night, I followed Daniel to the garage. I saw Natalie arrive. I waited outside for almost 2 hours, gathering my courage, and then she stopped talking, staring into the void in front of her. What happened next? Carol, I heard. Screaming, they were fighting. Natalie was demanding money, threatening to tell me everything. Said she had proof that he raped her, that he forced her into a relationship, blackmailed her. It was all lies. I'd heard enough of their conversations to know that she was the initiator, that she seduced him. But she threatened to destroy him, our reputations, our careers, our lives, and that's when you shot her. Morgan finished Carol. Finally looked him straight in the eye. No, detective, I didn't shoot. Natalie? Morgan frowned, confused. But on the tape, you see me. Yes, I went in there with a gun. I really wanted to scare them, but when I saw Natalie run out of the garage, Carol stammered, her voice shaking. Daniel fired. He appeared behind me, grabbed the gun out of my hands, and shot her in the back of the head as she turned toward the car. Tears rolled down Carol's cheeks. I didn't even have time to scream. It all happened so fast, and then he turned to me with a gun in his hand and said, Now we're tied up. Either we get out together or we go to jail together. Morgan watched Carol carefully, trying to determine if she was telling the truth. Why didn't you go to the police right away? Because I chickened out, she answered, simply because he was right. I went there with a gun, with the intention of threatening them. My fingerprints were on the gun. Who would believe I didn't pull the trigger? Besides, she stammered, I still loved him, as crazy as that sounds. 20 years of marriage couldn't be undone in an instant. Even after such a betrayal. What did you do with the body? Daniel made me help drag it into the garage. Said, we needed to think about how to cover our tracks. He was strangely calm. Methodical, wiped the blood off the asphalt, cleaned up the garage. Then he wrapped the body in a tarp, and we took it to an abandoned shop. He said they wouldn't find the body there right away, and when they did, it would be harder to connect the murder to us. As you can see, he was wrong about that. Morgan stood up and paced the hall. Room thinking about what he'd heard, Carol's story sounded convincing, but it contradicted some of the details in the videotape. The tape showed that it was the second figure, presumably Carol, who fired the shot. On the other hand, the quality of the recording left much to be desired, and it was impossible to determine exactly who fired the shot. Do you know where the gun is now? He finally asked Daniel. Said he got rid of it, dumped it in the river, on his way home from work the next day. And you believed him? Carol shook her head. No, Daniel would never throw away a gun registered in his name. It's too risky. I think he hid it somewhere. Where do you think he'd hide it? He has a hiding place in his basement, behind a false wall in the wine cellar. He thinks, I don't know about it, but I accidentally found it a few years ago when I was looking for Christmas decorations. An hour later, police officers with a search warrant retrieved a Glock pistol from a hiding place in the Foster's basement. Forensics confirmed that it was the gun used to kill Natalie. Both Daniel's and Carol's fingerprints were found on the grip, which made it impossible to determine who had fired the shot in the holding cell. Daniel Foster initially refused to testify again, but when he was shown the videotape and told of the recovered weapon, he broke down. She fired the shot. Not me, he shouted, pounding his fists on the table. Carol appeared out of nowhere with a gun in her hand. Natalie didn't even have time to realize what was happening. I tried to stop her, I swear, but it was too late. Morgan listened with an impenetrable expression. It's interesting that your wife says the exact opposite. She says you grabbed the gun from her and shot her. She's lying. Foster's eyes were glittering feverishly. Of course, she'll say anything to protect herself. But the tape shows that she was the shooter. That's her figure on the video. The quality of the tape doesn't show exactly who pulled the trigger, Morgan said calmly, but your actions after the murder are very clear. You helped hide the body, destroyed evidence, lied to the police, even if you weren't the shooter. You're an accessory. Foster wrapped his arms around his head. I panicked. What would you do if you were me? She killed a man in front of me and then told me that if I didn't help her cover her tracks, she'd claim I killed Natalie to cover up our affair. The affair you were having with your 18-year-old niece, Morgan said coldly, the girl your wife and her sister had entrusted to your care? Daniel lowered his head. I know what I did was disgusting. I'm sorry to Carol. I'm sorry to my sister. But I didn't kill Natalie. Further investigation failed to establish with absolute certainty who fired the fatal shot. Ballistics tests confirmed that the bullet was fired from the gun, found, but microscopic traces of both spouses' DNA were found on the trigger. The videotape, despite improvements in quality, also did not give a definite answer. The angle of the camera did not allow to see exactly who was holding the gun at the moment of the shot. 3 weeks after Natalie Gray's murder, prosecutors filed charges against both spouses. Daniel Foster was charged with seduction of a minor because the beginning of their relationship was before Natalie turned 18, and accessory to murder. Carol Foster was charged with aggravated second-degree murder. Both parties insisted on their innocence of murder, shifting the blame to each other in the absence of hard evidence pointing to a specific shooter. The jury had to decide whose version of events looked more plausible. Detective Victor Morgan stood at the window of his office, looking out at the drizzling rain. The Foster trial was due to begin in a week, and he had been called as a key witness for the prosecution. But even after nearly 2 months of investigation, he still wasn't sure exactly who had pulled the trigger. That fateful night on his desk lay a weighty file of case files. Evidence, testimony, photographs, expert reports all pointed to the fact that both spouses had been involved in the tragedy. But the main question remained unanswered. Morgan was convinced of only one thing. Natalie Gray's death was the result of a chain of betrayals, lies, and manipulation on each side of the triangle. The phone on the desk rang, snapping the detective out of his reverie. "Morgan," he answered, still looking out the window. "Detective, this is Sullivan from the tech department. We found something interesting in Natalie Gray's cloud storage. It seems she set it up to automatically send multiple files if she doesn't log into her account for 48 hours. What kind of files? Mostly videotapes. Very, explicit with her and Daniel Foster. There's also an audio recording apparently made shortly before her death. I think you should take a look at it an hour later." Morgan was listening to Natalie's last recording. The girl's voice sounded agitated, breaking into a whisper. "At times, if you're listening to this, it means something has happened to me. I'm afraid Daniel might do something crazy. He's gotten really jumpy since I said I was going to tell Carol everything. He swears he loves me, but I don't believe him. He's just afraid of scandal, losing his job, going to jail. I'm scared. Carol's acting weird too, looking like she knows, but I can't go on with this lie any longer. It was a mistake from the beginning. I thought I was in control, but now I realize I was trapped myself." The recording cut off halfway through, as if someone had suddenly entered the room, forcing Natalie to interrupt her monologue. Morgan leaned back in his chair, feeling his headache getting worse. The tape added details to the picture of events, but it didn't give a definitive answer. Natalie was afraid of both Daniel and Carol. She realized she'd gone too far in her manipulative game, but it was too late to back down. He was sure of one thing. There were no innocents in this story. Each of the participants in this triangle made his own choice, which led to a tragic ending. Natalie, who seduced her aunt's husband and tried to blackmail him, Daniel, who betrayed his wife and his own moral principles for the sake of a forbidden relationship. Carol, driven to despair by the betrayal of the two people closest to her in the end. Whoever pulled the trigger that night, the bullet was only the final point in a story that couldn't have ended well from the start. 6 months later, the court handed down the verdict. Daniel Foster was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Carol Foster received 5 years probation for accessory after the fact to the crime. Morgan was present in the courtroom. When the sentence was announced, he watched the Foster couple sitting on opposite sides of the room, a gulf between them that nothing could bridge. 20 years of marriage shattered in just a few months of secret meetings in an industrial garage. After the hearing, Morgan met Carol at the courthouse exit. She looked 10 years older, but there was a new calm in her eyes. "Are you satisfied with the verdict?" the detective asked. Carol smiled sadly. "Justice has been served. Isn't that what we all wanted? Are you sure it's justice?" Morgan asked quietly, still doubting her innocence. Carol stared into his eyes for a long moment before answering. "I'll live with that for the rest of my life, detective, regardless of who pulled the trigger. My life ended that night, just like Natalie's. The only difference is that I'm still breathing." She turned and walked away, a lone figure against the gray autumn sky. Morgan stared after her, realizing that he might never know the whole truth about the gunshot. In the darkness of the industrial zone, some secrets people carry with them forever.